Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special meeting of the Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee, where we'll be looking at devolution and local government reorganisation. As this is the first meeting of Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee for this municipal year, I would like to welcome our new members, Councillor Loughran, Councillor Mackie, Councillor Goddard and Councillor Meadows. I'd like to inform those present that this meeting is being webcast live and will be capable of repeated viewing. First item of procedural business is the declaration of substitutes. We do have a few. If Councillor Parrott, would you like to? Microphone, please.
Yes, Councillor Parrott, I'm substituting for Councillor Cattell.
Thank you. Councillor Fitzgerald.
Yeah, I'm substitute for
Councillor Fowler.
Thank you. And Kerry.
Councillor Pickett, substituting for Councillor Sykes.
Thank you very much. Also, Mary Davies, property for the Older People's Council, is unable to attend today, so we've invited Doug Thompson, another OPC rep, to ensure that older people's concerns are heard at the meeting. I don't know if he's online yet, but we are expecting him to be. So do any members wish to declare an interest in relation to any matters included on the agenda? Oh, good. Oh, by the way, I'd also like to welcome various members of People Committee. Sorry, how remiss of me. We invited you all. Welcome. Glad you could make it. So we have no part 2 items today, so the press and public won't be excluded. So today's meeting is a special meeting to look at the ongoing programmes of devolution and local government reorganisation for Sussex and Brighton. As this subject has an overlap in remit, we've invited members of People Overview and Scrutiny Committee to attend and provide input if they wish to. We're being asked, and we also have Jackie online from sunny Spain from People Committee as well. We're being asked to note the update to members on devolution and local government reorganisation and to comment on the plans for both programmes. Any comments will be considered ahead of the Cabinet meeting in June, where this will be presented. We are joined by Councillor John Hewitt, Cabinet Advisor on Devolution and Local Government Reorganisation, who will be presenting today, I believe. We also have with us Bella Sankey, the Leader of the Council, and Alex Vose, Head of the Cabinet Office, and Liz Colbert, Director for Governance and Law, all of whom are on hand to help with any questions. We have online Lucy Spicer from the policy team and 2 consultants, Julian Osgothorpe and James Stainer. I hope I got that right. I'd like to welcome them all to the meeting. Although we have only one item on the agenda, there are a lot of us here this afternoon and we will have lots of questions to get through. So can I therefore please request that both those asking and answering questions are as brief and to the point as possible, as we want everyone who wishes to contribute to have the opportunity. So I'd just like to remind members here that while I'm sure all questions on the timelines and processes involved in the devolution and local government reorganisation pathways will be welcomed and answered by our various experts as clearly as they are able, I certainly hope so, as I don't think I'm the only one who is confounded by the dizzying speed at which many and varied threads of all these related changes are proposed to unfold. And I hope to understand it all more clearly by the end of this meeting. But we are not here to try and make or remake any decisions already taken. We are already on the pathway to both LGR and Sussex-wide devolution. And while we are entitled to question and give opinions on the detail of the next steps to be taken, it would be a waste of our time and others to be questioning that they will be taken. So having said all of that, I will invite, so there are no public questions and no member questions, so I will invite Councillor Hewitt to present to the committee. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everyone for inviting us along to the meeting today. So as introduced, I'm the Cabinet Advisor for devolution and local government reorganisation, and after I've completed this presentation, I'm going to hand over to Bella to say a few words, and then of course we'll open up for any questions. This scrutiny committee today is going to be a really valuable part of the consultation process for both devolution and local government reorganisation. Any views, feedback and questions will form a part of the general consultation. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. Oh, thank you. So the devolution was in the Labour Party's manifesto for the 2024 general election, where there's a commitment for areas which aren't in devolved parts of the country will be able to join those devolved areas. It's currently around about half the population in England is in a devolved area in one form or another. So this commitment would create a universal devolution throughout England, as well as the regions in Scotland, North Ireland and Wales. The government has led on the consultation for devolution for Sussex, and alongside this, local government reorganisation is taking place. They're two separate processes, but run parallel and interlink with each other. Move on to the next slide. Thanks, Sir. Okay, as devolution already exists in various forms in other parts of the country, covering over half the population, the government really does support devolution for the reasons outlined. They can help deliver growth, means that policy can be tailored to local situations, enables coordinated actions in a place, and gives communities a greater say in decisions that affect them, and will also help trial different methods to drive innovation. It's sort of, in a nutshell, devolution is the process in which a central government transfers powers, responsibilities and funding to lower levels of government. And on that photo, they can make out that sort of is just a way to illustrate that those regions which already have devolved areas have representation. They have a figure to showcase and champion their areas, and will be the representatives on what will be known as the Council of Nations and Regions. Move to the next slide, please. Thanks, Sir. So, along with East and West Sussex County councils, we in Brighton and Hove applied to be part of the devolution priority programme. We applied for that in January of this year, and alongside the 5 other areas which are detailed on the slides, we were accepted in February of this year. And that slide also includes the existing areas which have devolved authorities in them. Move to the next, thank you. So, as I said, government ran a consultation from the 17th of February to the 13th of April on devolution for Sussex and Brighton, and they're currently assessing that it meets against their statutory tests, as well as views from residents who submitted that. We'll be expecting the outcome from that later this month, and if all approved, it will go through the Houses of Commons and Lords up until October, and will allow mayoral elections to take place in May 2026, and a mayoral combined county authority to be created then as well. Move on to the next, please. The model which has been, which we applied for and is being consulted on, is known as the Mayoral Strategic Authority. As you'll see from the slides, there are 3 potential options, and the reason we chose this Mayoral Strategic Authority, we feel it would be the one which would allow us to have the greatest say and powers, and it will be a body which would be formed of the directly elected mayor and representatives from the local authorities in that Sussex and Brighton footprint, which will be the decision makers on that authority. Move on to the next one. Thanks, Seth. So the powers and funding, which will be devolved from central government, and this is going to be underpinned by legislation in the government's white paper, rather than previously on a deal by deal basis. It's those 7 functions are transport and local infrastructure, skills and employment support, housing and strategic planning, economic development and regeneration, environmental and climate change, health, wellbeing and public service reform, and public safety. And for having those areas devolved to Sussex will help decisions made to reflect our urban, our coastal and our rural communities which exist in Sussex. Effectively, it will be decisions for Sussex will be made in Sussex. So for the next steps for devolution, the tier authorities, so that's us and the 2 county councils, will continue to meet with partners and stakeholders to engage with them. So just in the last week or so, we've met with the fire service authorities and the further and higher education bodies. Government will be setting up devolution framework implementation sessions, and so for the decision making, our preference is going to be it will work that all the local authorities in Sussex would be decision makers with voting rights, but we'll also continue to include and meet with the external stakeholders, but they won't have the decision making powers. And also, the next steps will include the recruitment to positions to set that authority up, and funding will be confirmed in the June this month's spending review. So takes us on to the local government reorganisation element of this process. So as everyone here will know, that Brighton and Hove is a unitary authority. It's the only unitary authority in Sussex that delivers approximately 700 services, whereas elsewhere in Sussex, the model is you have a 2-tier system where you have county councils, and within them you have districts and borough councils. For example, if you live in Lewes, you would have Lewes District Council providing some of your services and East Sussex County Council providing the others. Part of this process for local government reorganisation is that all of those 2-tier areas will change to unitary authorities. It's also important to note that town and parish councils will remain as they are. So, of course, here in Brighton and Hove, we have St Dean Parish Council. So in Brighton and Hove, as well as East and West Sussex, we were all asked to submit an interim response to local government reorganisation. We were required to do that by the 21st of March. So it was a very limited window to do so, as we were invited to begin that process at the start of February. However, we were able to run an engagement exercise from the 24th of Feb to the 10th of March to promote and solicit views, where we received around 600 submissions. Our interim proposal was to include that there would be 5 unitary authorities created in the Sussex footprint. Sussex has a population of around about 1.7 million residents, so that would equate to 5 unitary authorities, each being around 300,000 to 400,000 in size. And to put that into scale, Brighton and Hove has a approximate population of 280,000. We felt that local authorities of those sizes would be appropriate to deliver the services, be value for money, but also to represent the places and communities they represent. At the start of the process, there was a figure which was widely publicised that the makeup of those unitary authorities would be 500,000. Over the last couple of months, there's been further clarity from government on that. And on Tuesday of this week, Jim McMahon, who's the minister for this process, answered a question in Parliament, and I will read it out because I'm conscious it wouldn't be in anyone's papers, as like I say, it was just published this Tuesday. So it goes on to say, in the feedback is a reiteration of the government's position that a population size of 500,000 or more is a guiding principle and not a strict target. We understand the need for flexibility, especially given our ambition to build out devolution and take account of housing growth alongside local government reorganisation. All proposals, whether they are at the guided level, above it or below it, should set out the rationale for the proposed approach clearly. The approach we have taken from the outset encourages and allows for councils to determine the right fit for their area. What works in one area may not apply in the same way in another, so that is right. The process does allow for flexibility. You can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So a couple of weeks ago, we received our feedback from government on our interim submission. I believe that is the whole response is published in your paper, so I won't sort of read over it verbatim, but just want to sort of highlight a couple of areas from it. You know, we see that the government's response is a constructive one. It recognises the work that we've already has been undertaken across Sussex, but it encourages us, and rightly so, to go further in terms of sharing data and evidence, as well as engagement and linking our area for local government reorganisation and devolution. The range of perspectives across the region, that's understandable and healthy, and we're aiming for a structure that delivers the best outcome for residents and meets the government's aims for greater financial stability of councils and public services. The government has asked for proposals that support devolution and are real local conditions, and that is why our proposal will consider the impact of any changes to Brighton Hove City Council on the wider Sussex footprint of the urban, rural and coastal communities which exist within. If we move on to the next 2 slides, please. Oh, lovely. Oh, thank you. And as covers on to our next steps for local government reorganisation. And just to pick up on what you said at the start, Chair, it's actually being targeted for tabled for July's cabinet meeting, not June. So just put out, I think it was originally going to be June, I think. So that's maybe where that was from. But effectively, our next main deadline from government is to submit our final submission to local government reorganisation by the 25th of September. And as part of that, it's going to be a data and evidence-based submission, and we'll be sharing and engaging data and evidence and public feedback with our neighbouring authorities. really are going to put a strong emphasis, because it is extremely valuable and is something we are taking very seriously, on promoting and facilitating consultation and engagement events with residents and stakeholders. We were proud to be one of the only councils in the country to run an early engagement exercise as part of our interim plan. And so over the 2 weeks, we had just under 600 responses. We want to build on this platform, so at the next stage of public consultation, before we submit the proposal, we strongly believe that any structural changes do reflect the local voices, and we recognise the valuable input from councillors, residents, businesses, partners, staff and trade unions. Our aim is to design a consultation that is meaningful and realistic in the window we have between now and September. We can't commit to a precise date for that opening, but we expect it to launch next month, and we'll be utilising the Your Voice platform alongside targeted engagement with groups, including voluntary organisations, business leaders and public service partners. We'll be reaching out to staff and unions in our internal channels and meetings. And it is one we expect to be an ongoing conversation, so it will go on beyond September. We feel it's a real focus on building trust and shaping proposals that work for communities over the long term and for the foreseeable future, and not just for the September deadline. So no, thank you. That's from me. Hand over to Councillor Sankey, and then we'll have obviously time for discussion, feedback and questions. I'm sure there'll be a couple.
Thanks very much, through the Chair. Thank you, Councillor Hewitt, for that excellent presentation. First thing I wanted to say to you all is that I'm really delighted to be here at this scrutiny session, and it's great to see representatives from both scrutiny committees. Hugely value and appreciate the work that you do to analyse some of the city's most pressing challenges and concerns, and really wanting to work in partnership as we develop our proposals on these matters of devolution and local government reorganisation. I'm keen to get into your questions, and I don't have a huge amount to add to what Councillor Hewitt has already presented as a kind of opening sort of explanation of where we're currently at with this. But safe to say, I think one of the things that I found most surprising when I took on this role as leader of this council in May 23 was the very limited extent, and that's probably putting it generously, that Brighton and Hove City Council was required to or incentivised to work and collaborate with councils in our region, in the rest of Sussex. There are obviously positive officer working relationships on specific areas, so whether it's adult social care or children's services, but the extent to which those actually arise and develop is pretty ad hoc. It's pretty dependent on individual circumstances. There is nothing really sort of strategic in place, no mechanism or requirement or anything in law to require us to collaborate in the interests of our residents, communities and businesses in our whole county of Brighton and Sussex. So I think that devolution is incredibly welcome. I think it's actually much overdue. I think there's a lot that we can learn from areas that have already devolved and are seeing benefits for their residents and communities. So I'm really pleased that we're in the government's priority programme and looking forward to seeing their response to the consultation that they led on earlier this year. But yeah, very keen to hear and take your questions and to get into more detail on what's before us.
Thank you both. Do the officers have anything to add to those presentations? No? Okay, in which case I'm just going to open it up to questions. Councillor Fishley, I saw first.
Thank you very much. In a recent article in brightonhovenews.org, they talked about how much it was all going to cost and quoted from a report by PwC that would cost each county £16 million. Could you comment on that, please?
Thank you. Probably for one of the officers to come in for any further clarity, but I believe that that report from PwC, which was quoted in there from 2020, was based on a model where it would be existing counties receiving the devolved powers. So it's not relevant to the government's white paper on devolution and the model which we're working towards now. I think it's quite a outdated model and not one which is going to be relevant for the route we're taking.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, so the model that Councillor Hewitt was referring to, so that report, which was from 2022, first it was commissioned by the County Councils Network, but it related to a model of devolution where each area negotiated a bespoke agreement for their area, whereas under the current framework, there's going to be a devolution deal which is consistent across. It's not going to be a negotiated deal that's bespoke to each area. So there'll be a devolution framework that's set out clearly. So I think the point that's being made is that there's a lot less time and cost, and you can see that from the length of time that's involved in moving to this model, is that there's not going to be years and years, which some of those previous deals that report was based on would have taken many years to evolve and develop.
Okay, so just ignore that 16 million, but do you have... Yeah, of course.
I would just add to what's been said by Councillor Hewitt and by Liz that the transition that the government is making away from deal-based models, I think, is really welcome. I think there's something quite problematic about different areas sort of negotiating different deals, different amounts of money, and I think actually the way that the government is going about devolution now is going to be much fairer. I also think that figure sort of overlooks and doesn't take into account the financial benefits of devolution. So it's just looking at the process in isolation. We can see from the government's announcement yesterday on transport that increasingly central government funding is going to be piloted through devolution areas. So actually what an area stands to gain financially from devolution, both I would argue from public sector investment and increased public sector investment, but also the capacity for a mayoral strategic authority to attract private investment to an area will, more than pay for itself in the long run. I believe that Greater Manchester, one of the first areas of England to start the devolution journey, is now one of the fastest growing economies in the whole of Europe. So the economic benefits and the income that will be generated both for residents, businesses, but also for local authorities through this process, I think mustn't be underestimated.
Thank you. Councillor Gray. Oh, yeah, go on.
Okay, I think I understand all that, but it's a startup and it'll have startup costs. Could you tell me how much money in this year's budget has the council set aside for devolution and LGO?
Thanks. So between all the other tiers, so the counties and Brighton and Hove, we'll receive 1 million capacity funding for 25-26 to support the establishment of the mayoral combined county authority. And it's not been agreed yet with the two county councils how this funding will be used.
Right, Councillor McClay and then Mark.
Thank you, and thanks for the presentation. So we've seen a plan drawn out, but we haven't seen any maps yet. And I was wondering, when it comes to the expansion option, what that looks like. Do you have a vision of how that's going to scale, what that boundary will be? And then also, I might as well ask this follow-up question now, is to think about some of the motivations around why we might expand, and whether that motivation is around housing supply and housing demand and looking to build more. Are you guys looking at some of the issues around development in the area already? So if we were to look at areas like East Saltdean, Telecombe, Peacehaven, they're already quite well developed. Telecombe, sorry. And so they're already developed to the point where they are starting to back on to the national park. In terms of housing growth, are we thinking about what opportunities have we there in terms of green space and the need for expanding?
Thanks very much for the question, Councillor Macleay. So on local government reorganisation, you'll have seen in our plan, we have put forward a suggestion of 5 unitary authorities for the whole of the MCA area, so Brighton and Hove, East Sussex and West Sussex. That is motivated in part by a number of things. Firstly, as you'll have seen, we did the engagement exercise with our residents, and as Councillor Hewitt said, very pleased that we were able to do that even in the short time frame that we had. It was clear from that I think residents have expressed that the city identity is very important. We are quite a unique city in many ways, and so retaining our size kind of broadly on our existing footprint is something that I think there is general support for. That said, we're also cognizant of the government's drive to push for greater efficiencies. The 500,000 figure that was in the white paper, which, as Councillor Hewitt has rightly said, is definitely open to flexibility and is there more as a sort of guiding principle to indicate the government isn't interested in places unitarising on a footprint of 100,000 or 200,000. It is wanting to look at a greater scale. So conscious of that, I think the feeling is that our current size of 280,000 is probably a bit too small to meet the kind of vision that the government is setting out. I think there are also definitely benefits to looking at where our current boundaries are. I think it's quite arbitrary that we have a line that runs through Saltdean as the example that you gave at the moment. So where the current boundaries are relatively arbitrary. I think there are definitely things we should be looking at, and this is coming on to the next stage of the process. Before drawing any lines on a map for a proposal, we need to start sharing data with our neighbouring authorities and looking at that data and trying to understand what local government reorganisation could deliver in terms of efficiencies, in terms of economic growth, in terms of rationalising some of where the existing boundaries are. So those are things we'll be taking into consideration and looking at a whole range of metrics. Yes, housing supply may be one of them. We'll also be looking at, what we need for growth, and we've recently published our economic growth plan for the city. It's very clear that we need more industrial space. So there are a whole range of things that we will look at when considering, how as a city can we drive progress for our region, and where do those boundaries make most sense. The other reason for proposing a larger number of unitaries, I think, for the region than some other authorities are considering, is that we feel it's very important. These two processes of local government reorganisation and devolution are happening side by side, but they are related. And the whole purpose and the whole thrust behind devolution is trying to return more power and control and influence to local communities over the decisions that are being made, and being able to shape their futures. And so if you keep that in mind, the idea then of unitarising into much larger bodies than currently exist in terms of the size of districts and boroughs, arguably means that residents may feel they are losing some influence and losing some control over sort of local services and losing that connection with how their services are being delivered. So part of the reason for proposing the figure of 5 unitaries to explore and test the data with is recognition that ideally we would still retain, in the way that local government is delivered across our region, we would retain that closeness to communities, we would retain that local identity, and that ultimately when you have your final configuration of unitaries sat around the mayoral strategic authority, every part of our region has a seat at the table and is able to influence the decisions that are being taken collectively for our area.
And just to come in as well, sorry, beg your pardon, just say, we deliberately sort of didn't draw lines on the map at this early stage. That's something which we really are going to want to flesh out and work on at the next round of consultation before September.
So just one final follow-up on that. Do you have an idea of how far, what would be the limit as to how far that boundary would go?
So again, I think it's safe to say we're in the early stages of ensuring that we can share data with neighbouring authorities and then test that data and develop proposals. The government's really clear in its response to us and to others in the devolution priority programme, in the response to the interim plans on local government reorganisation, that they expect us to work collaboratively, to share data, to ultimately work from shared data, so that if there are a range of proposals and options that are put forward across our whole area of Brighton and Hove and Sussex, that we're working from the same sets of data.
Thanks. From the voluntary sector, I think we're not so much looking at the detail, because that detail is going to be made and it's going to have a process, but we're looking more at the process. And clearly we're keen that the voluntary sector and voluntary sector groups are more engaged. I noticed on some of the plans it lists businesses and it lists residents. It doesn't have groups and voluntary sector as a specific sector to actually be engaged with. And thanks to John for mentioning the Minister's statement, because I've just literally read it in there, and it's quite interesting in there that it actually engages and specifically says that that community voices, it says, LGR should enhance, not diminish local engagements. Councils are encouraged to embed community participation into governance structures. So that's what we're here as reps. That's in the Minister's clarification statement from, what was it, 2 days ago. And I particularly noticed with interest the idea of this neighbourhood area committee, which is not brand new, but suddenly it's on the table, to have neighbourhood area committees led by ward councillors with parish town councillors and community representatives. So it would be really interesting. I mean, that is only 2 days old, so I'm not going to say you've got a fully formulated idea of how to deal with it, but certainly that seems to introduce a whole new level of participation from the communities, and it'd be really interesting to know how that is going to be taken forward. And just to you, Councillor Sankey, I have one specific question, or it might be to Trevor as well. You mentioned the funding announcement yesterday. It's been renamed from whatever it was, CRSDS, to Transport for City Regions. Now, would this new authority be counted as a city region? Is that something that we can't tell yet? Because obviously some of those regions, west of England, have Bristol and lots of surrounding areas, but the Manchesters are very much totally urbanised within their area. So I don't know if we would count, or this Sussex would count as a city region and get funding through that process or not. And again, that's a large amount of money, which hopefully the new authority would have access to, one would hope. But is it a definition issue, or what do we know?
Before Bella answers that, can I just jump in for a second and just say that we do have a couple of Cabinet members here as esteemed guests, because they've chosen to be here, but they're not specifically here to answer questions. We fielded a team of the people most expert on this subject to answer the questions. So unless one of them feels compelled to jump in, or Bella feels compelled to order them to jump in, then we'll leave them out of the questioning, please. Thank you. Bella.
Thanks, Mark, very much for the questions. On the first point you make, I think, one of my reflections looking at the white paper and looking at the goals, the stated goals and objectives of devolution, and also looking at what has happened in places like Liverpool and in the Midlands, so many things that I think the government is trying to achieve through this process really speak to issues of the community and voluntary sector lead on, push for, are expert in, have so much insight on, whether that's addressing health inequalities, whether it's around skills and employment support, or whether it's about active travel and better integrated transport. So I absolutely agree with you wholeheartedly that the CVS sector has to play a big role in this. We've touched on it a bit already today, but the timeline that government gave us for kind of applying for devolution priority programme, for then submitting an interim plan, didn't give us a huge amount of time to do maybe as much engagement as you'd ideally do. As I referenced, we did do the engagement exercise that was obviously open to residents, to staff, to unions, to CVS as well. But I'd be very willing over this next period before the interim plan goes in, and as we are devising the and shaping what will become the Mayoral Strategic Authority, to really engage with the community and voluntary sector in the city. I'm very conscious from the conversations I do have with the sector, how much in many ways you're already quite devolved yourselves. So organisations that might be based in the city but actually reach out into the rest of Sussex. So I think there are huge opportunities for kind of greater alignment and greater efficiencies and more potential leverage for the CVS sector through this process. As I say, it is for us to shape. So having your insight both on substantive issues, but working out how you might be part of the processes going forward, I'd really welcome. On your specific question around how we would be defined, I don't have an answer to that. So to say, my understanding from the announcement yesterday was that the additional funding was going to areas that are devolved already, and indeed, over the last almost 1 year that this new government has been in, there have been several similar announcements, whether it's around some of the innovation funding that has principally gone to areas that already have devolution in place. It's very clear to me that the thrust of government policy making is to work very collaboratively with those areas that already have a kind of better way to strategically, I would say, allocate funding and pilot things and test things and get results that can then feed back into government policy making. So my very clear understanding is that by securing devolution for our region, we will be getting enhanced central government investment across all of the areas that devolution is set to touch.
And thanks, Mark. And I'll just follow on as well, just to say that, this is an overarching change in form of governance. It is not to replace communities, all the work, local groups, voluntary sectors, town councils, parish councils, and residents associations. And that really is sort of hopefully been underpinned in our vision for having the 5 unitary authorities, because we feel that they would then be able to reflect those local places and communities better.
Thank you. Councillor Goddard.
Oh, just on the neighbourhood area committees, I mean, as I said, it's 2 days old, but obviously just an assurance that that's going to be how they're formulated. Would it be? Says wards. I mean, I'm assuming it wouldn't be one ward, it'd be clusters of wards, but just to hope that will be part of the formulation of the process.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, in relation to your specific question about engagement with the CVS sector as part of the local government reorganisation work, we've got our consultants with us listening in this evening, and they will be leading that work with and for us, but as part of that work, they've already identified all the CVS organisations that we want to engage with, and we'll be reaching out individually, and we will work with you to decide whether you prefer to do that as individual bodies or collectively, to be part of that engagement.
Thank you. Councillor Goddard.
Thank you, Chair. It's lovely to be a new member of this committee. I was involved in some of the early discussions on devolution and want to congratulate Councillor Hewitt and Councillor Sankey on what I thought was an excellent run through of what is, in your words, can feel like dizzying speed. I've also just walked to the town hall and walked past a stone in the pavement that had this vertical line on it. On one side it said HP and on the other it said BP, Hove Parish, Brighton Parish. So local government reorganisation is not just frozen in time, and we should not be afraid of it. We should in fact be congratulating all of the people involved on getting us onto the priority programme. This is not business as usual. If we get this right, if we begin to shape Sussex in new ways, then we can play catch up. Because frankly, Sussex should be further ahead than it is. And John, Councillor Hewitt, talked about coastal, urban and rural areas right across our county. We should be further ahead. We should be further ahead in terms of the economy. We should be further ahead in terms of the visitor economy, skills, in-work skills, etc., etc. And it's that spirit of excitement that I think we should embrace. And it isn't business as usual, but it's going to involve different culture. And I'm really interested in what Bella said about there is no requirement to collaborate. This is going to be collaboration to the max. This is not going to be politics. This is going to be politicians working in new ways with each other, cross-party, cross-authority and the clue's in the title, by the way, strategic authority. And that's got to have a credibility, and that's got to have a partnership and a spirit and a culture. And I'd be really interested in your comments, both of you, if you could, on how we're going to invest in that new culture, how we're going to invest in new partnerships. So I think particularly to your point about speed, how are we going to learn from some of the successes and not so successes of devolution past? That's what really interests me. So we can get Sussex up to speed, to benefit, and this is the only reason we should be doing it, is to benefit residents, not to benefit politicians. And that is the crucial bit of this devolution debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goddard. I think some incredibly important points there and question. I couldn't agree more that Sussex is currently behind. In my role as deputy leader of the Labour Group and the Local Government Association, I spend time with council leaders right across the country and seeing how local authority leaders in places that have long had devolution, that are now very sort of comfortable and sort of have their processes up and running and are making decisions and driving their cases forward. You really see how it is an absolute no-brainer in terms of, so many metrics and so many things that we're trying to achieve here in the city in our council plan. In fact, those local leaders in places that have devolution already are very much pushing, and I think we will see some of this in the devolution bill that is soon to be published, for greater devolution, whether that is looking at greater fiscal devolution, whether that is looking at giving mayoral strategic authorities the power to request additional powers or to pilot particular new projects. So creating much more of a kind of conversation between regional and central government about what is needed in our places. And I think that's excellent. I think it's really to be welcomed. So I think we're kind of just getting to sort of stage one by being on this priority programme and by establishing this regional authority for May next year. But there is even more to come that I think will bring even greater benefits, and it'd be good to have some more analysis and maybe another session once we have that bill being published. To your point, Councillor Goddard, about building the new culture, I think that's incredibly important. I think one of the challenges of having as many local authorities as we currently have in our region, by having our neighbours existing within a two-tier structure, and just the weight of the number of services we provide here as a unitary authority of over 700 services, there is always the risk in any institution or any system of silos, of there not being a culture of kind of openness and transparency and collaboration. So it's that change of culture that I think we really have to drive as we engage in this process. I'm personally very keen that as we receive the government's response to the consultation and then decide the process and the mechanism by which we establish the new mayoral strategic authority, that we try and make that process as inclusive as possible. I think that ensuring that all of the local authorities in our region, so Brighton and Hove, East Sussex and West Sussex, have a seat at that table and come together really as partners in this process, as equal partners in this process, will be really important to building that new culture that we want to build. Just building better relationships, knowing each other more, understanding each other's challenges in different areas will be really important. In my capacity as chair of the Greater Brighton Economic Board, we're already having, I think, really productive conversations at that board level about the challenges that we each face in our respective patches. I recall a recent conversation with the leader of Arran, who was talking about the particular transport challenges in his area and the housing challenges. There will be areas of similarity and areas of difference, but the more we can understand that, the more we can then shape what it is we want our new strategic authority to focus on, and how we want it to use its powers and its money to, as you so rightly put it, improve the lives and benefit our residents, our communities, our voluntary sector activity, and our businesses as well.
And I'll just come in there and say, first of all, just say thanks to Ty for work you've undertaken with this at the start of the process for it all. No, it's really got sort of good footing with that. It's also worth highlighting the sort of broader sort of picture of it all. The UK is one of the most centralised countries in Europe in terms of governance. So having this, whilst I said that earlier, just over half the population in England is in the devolved areas. This will help move it on and have a universal devolution throughout England. The areas which have had varying forms of devolution in England, they've evolved over time, they've changed over time. So we're coming into quite a good fitting of knowing what has worked well, and having this now going through legislation in the in the government's white paper will have that underpinned, as we said earlier, not on a deal-by-deal bargaining basis, but on one which is underpinned legislation. And we feel, that will start to unlock powers in Sussex. And in terms of a culture change, it is going to be a real noticeable difference. You're going to have a Sussex table, as it were, with the representatives along with them from the unitary authorities, along with the mayor, and that is one of the reasons why we are in favour of having 5 unitary authorities, as that would allow a more widening pool of reps from around the county to be on that cabinet table, as well as working with a lot of authorities and bodies and sectors, etc., who already work on a pan-Sussex model. So it's joining all of that up. So governance will catch up and match what's happening with organisations which already operate successfully on that model.
Thank you. I have Jackie online.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I mean, it was a lot to read, and there's a lot of information, a lot of ambition in the devolution plan and the local government reorganisation. Obviously, at the moment, not a great deal of small print because we haven't quite reached that point yet. I very much agree about the idea of 5 unitary authorities, just because I think it's more democratic. I think if you have 3, they're going to be very different sizes, and they're generally, I think, not in particularly in the more rural areas and some of the coastal areas, perhaps people won't have the same kind of say as they've had at the moment, or they have at the moment with district councils. So I think that that is a good move, but it does tie in devolution quite heavily with local government reorganisation. And one of the things I picked up on was the amount of money that's available for local government reorganisation in the first place. And that money, 75 million, is divided between 21 areas, it says. And so I'm guessing, I worked it out, it's about 300,000 that Brighton and Hove would get, but on the basis that at the moment there would only be 3 unitary authorities. So we would obviously get a bit less if there were 5. So I don't know if we could negotiate for a bit more in doing that. And it did worry me as well, because I'm hoping we will get quite a bit of money for the cost of devolution. But regarding the LGR, worried me because there's a lot of talk about we're expected to finance a lot of the local government reorganisation after this initial sum via capital receipts and so on. Previously, there was talk about giving us some money back at the end of the process, but there isn't any, I can't see anything about that in this document. So I was just wondering if that financial situation of 5 unitary authorities, which I do believe to be much more democratic, could just be answered. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Quinn, for the question. And I suppose just for clarity, so the figure that was published, I think it was earlier this week, that you refer to of the 7.5 million or thereabouts for local government reorganisation funding for the 21 areas. The allocation that has been provided to ourselves and East Sussex jointly, so just to pause on that point, the government in all of its correspondence with us about local government reorganisation deals with West Sussex on the one hand and Brighton and Hove together with East Sussex on the other hand. The government follows the old ceremonial county boundary. So the allocation to us jointly with East Sussex is 302,000 for this first phase of local government reorganisation sort of planning. So that funding will go towards the work that we're now doing internally with our consultants to develop our final proposals for local government reorganisation that will be submitted at the end of September. So the issue of how many unitaries are eventually put forward for this region and the issue of what government's decision on that is doesn't impact that funding at all. That's kind of funding that's going for this first phase. And then you're absolutely right to say that the government has been clear that in part to fund local government reorganisation, it will be open and available to councils to look at releasing capital receipts. There are other ways in which this can be funded, but the government is also really clear that one of the driving purposes behind local government reorganisation is better financial sustainability and greater efficiencies. You can very much see how that will be possible in 2-tier areas where currently you have in areas, as John described, if you're in Lewis, you have 2 councils, 2 bodies, local government bodies that are providing a mix of your services. Each one has its own back office, whether that's legal or democratic services or whatever that may be. So there's clearly a lot of overlap going on there, and you can see how efficiencies will be driven through this process. So I think it's important to be clear that the end result of this should be better value for money for our residents and our communities, services delivered in a more streamlined way with economies of scale. I would argue particularly in those 2-tier areas where I think there is currently duplication and potential, waste of money.
Okay, thank you. I did have a couple of other questions, actually. Can I just ask them quickly?
Go ahead, Jackie.
Yes, one of the things that is the planning was talked about by Councillor Maclay, and it's this idea that they would, people would have more say, and yet there's these clashes at the moment with actually on a lot of planning applications, the bigger ones, people would maybe have less say because actually the government can come in and say, no, we're deciding on this. So I think there will be tussles over that. And you might like to comment about that. And the other thing is about the consultations that we need to have about devolution and also local government reorganisation. And quite rightly, we've heard comments about, community groups and so on, and community sort of neighbourhood area committees. We do actually have groups that can be consulted at the moment, which are things like the Hove Neighbourhood Forum, and there are these various forums across the city, which I think would be extremely good to consult with, because often they have very large numbers of members that they can talk to. And I think that that's quite important because we always have a problem in the city in getting to everybody. And I'm quite worried about rural areas with that and some of the coastal areas about actually reaching people and properly consulting. So any comments on that would be quite helpful. Maybe East and West Sussex have actually talked about this with you as well. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Just coordination. I'll actually just come in a bit on the consultation bit, and thank you for the question, Councillor O'Quinn. So, might have slightly conflated a bit of the devolution consultation along with the local government reorganisation consultation there. So, the devolution one was run by government, and that's the one which has closed in mid-April, and we're now looking forward to starting our consultation and engagement on LGR within the Sussex footprint, and us running it from here in Brighton and Hove. And yeah, you're right, there are a number of bodies which we really do want to need to consult with on that. Neighbourhood forums you've described, we've got existing community groups, but really just getting as much engagement from as many residents as possible in what will be a relatively short space of time to do so, really is our main priority. As I sort of said, as part of the presentation at the start, we really can't underestimate how valuable that is going to be.
Thanks, Councillor Hewitt, and Councillor O'Quinn, thanks very much for the question around sort of place planning. My understanding from the white paper and government sort of announcements and clarifications since is that for areas both in the priority programme or that already have devolution and areas that don't, there is going to be a requirement for more joined up spatial planning, so to develop plans across a geographic area. And I think the benefit of having a strategic authority that has constituent members from the local authorities that make up that area is that those plans will be developed in collaboration. So it will be a collective effort to develop a spatial plan for the area that will then influence the local plans that are developed in individual local authority areas. I think this makes perfect sense. Again, sort of coming back to my comments right at the outset, I find it quite shocking, really, that there is currently nothing in place at the regional level that requires that level of cooperation. So where you do have the bright red lines and the borders, nothing that requires proper joined up thinking about place planning. And I think that's inefficient, and I think it undermines progress. So I think it's a really positive thing. I think the fact that the Strategic Authority will have oversight and influence over strategic planning, not just for housing delivery, but also for transport, the fact that they will have the relationship with Homes England to unlock more affordable housing for our place, for our city and for our region is really positive. And, we know from all of the evidence that when you think about housing, transport, jobs in a really joined up way, that is how you unlock economic growth, higher standards of living, all of the things that we're seeking to deliver for our residents here in the city. So I think that spatial planning going on at the strategic level is a really positive thing. Again, giving our local area and our residents greater influence over what's happening in their place, and it not just being central government that has to swoop in and give directions and orders about how plans need to evolve.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just want to point out to everyone that although the meeting can go on much longer than this, as long as the questions last, but Councillor Sankey needs to leave at 5:30ish. So, and I've still got a list already of 7 people who want to ask questions. So please keep them as brief as you can. Next one on my list is Sue.
Okay, this is a really question because I just wanted to flag that we don't all agree. It's not all that we, are becoming a bit self-congratulatory. There is a political viewpoint to this which doesn't feel that this is devolution, and we don't agree with mayors, certainly in the Green Party, but locally there's also quite a lot of concern from other political groups about what's happening with this. And also nationally, we are in a completely chaotic political situation, as far as I can see, with new political parties which aren't represented here rearing, coming along. So I suppose you weren't clear about how this consultation is really happening. It will decrease our representation as councillors, because if we expand our boundaries, we'll presumably lose councillors. You can't have the number of councillors that exist across Sussex, including the districts, once you make smaller counts, once you change the boundaries. So I'd like to know when that would happen. But also, you've got some consultants appointed, so I don't know if I think they're there. I'd like to know a bit more about what they're going to do, because we haven't been asked our views, either as councillors or as political parties. It doesn't sound yet as though the voluntary sector's being engaged. So how, it's great. It sounds like this is going to happen. How is this going to happen? Are there going to be specific meetings? This isn't, if we're going to do scrutiny, we need to have something here to say, actually, we don't really think that we want to include Peacehaven. We want to include Shoreham. That should be scrutiny rather than just like listening to asking questions, because I think we already knew quite a lot of those answers. Well, I did. But I need the specifics about what's going to happen when. September's not very far. We've got blinking summer in the middle. So how are we going to have people agreeing the boundaries that are going to government by the end of September when nobody's even asked us yet? Thank you.
Thanks very much for your question, Councillor Shanks. I think it would be news to your mayoral candidate for the West of England contest, Mary Page, that the Green Party doesn't agree with mayors. But anyway, moving on from that point, as we said, we ran an engagement exercise, one of the few local authorities to do so in the period that we had between the interim plan going in and it being announced that we were in the priority programme. We ran a public engagement exercise. We had over 600 responses to that, which I think was good for the limited 2-week window that we had. And we made sure that we did lots of promotion and really let people know that it was happening. We've also been engaging staff in all staff briefings and trying to do as much engagement as possible in the short window that government has given us. So I don't think it's accurate to say that engagement hasn't been going on and that consultation hasn't happened. I think, as I say, we're quite unique in how much of it we've already done, but completely recognise and accept the point that this is happening at speed. And so wanting to ensure that we are doing as much as we can to give people the opportunity to feed in. I think that Councillor Hewitt set it out in the opening presentation that we are aiming to publish a consultation on local government reorganisation and the final plan that we need to submit in September next month. So we'll be looking to get something published as soon as we can, given that we and our consultants are now engaged in work which includes needing to share data and receive data from other authorities to develop some proposals that we can then put out to public consultation, and obviously very much welcome the views of opposition parties on those proposals.
Thanks, and to follow on to the point, thanks, Councillor Shanks, about you referred to like the national picture, and I think you were referring to if there was a mayor elected from a, let's say a party which not everyone shares their views. I think it's important and really worth clarifying. The mayor themselves under this model won't be an all-powerful, all singing, all dancing one person in this. They would literally just have one voice at that cabinet table. They wouldn't be able to put through any agenda without the support of their cabinet in there. And that goes back to a reason to support our third model of having 5 unitary authorities, as that will allow a cabinet to be made up of the mayor and 10 representatives from across Sussex, where they would all have to work collaboratively. So I think it is just worth highlighting that the mayor wouldn't have overarching powers, they wouldn't have veto rights or anything like that. They would simply be, I guess, the chair of a cabinet. They need to work their cabinet to get the agenda through, and sort of one of their main sort of functions would be to be the representative for the strategic authority, rather than being like a sort of presidential type powers.
I mean, the reason, obviously, we don't agree with police commissioners either, but you've got an election, you stand, sort of thing. I mean, there's lots of things that. So I think we would obviously put forward a candidate from there. I'm just concerned that this is a very rushed process based on a lot of, based on I don't think in Labour's manifesto. If it was, I missed it. So, it does feel that we're not getting the opportunity to shape this. If that's your plan for 5 unitaries, is that also the thinking of Lewis District Council, any other Mid Sussex District Council, West Sussex Council? I haven't looked into this that much, to be honest. What are their views? Because it's all very well to say that's what Brighton and Hove suggest. I mean, I would certainly prefer us to stay as the boundaries of Brighton and Hove, but that's not going to appeal to a lot of the other authorities, I would have thought.
Thanks for the further question. So just point of correction for the public record, devolution was very much in the Labour Party's manifesto. We have a mandate from the general election to press ahead with devolution. I think it's really important to be clear about that in an age where there is clearly mistrust in politics and where there is a risk of fueling cynicism that politicians don't do what they say they're going to do. We have to be really accurate about the fact that the Labour Party promised this. We put it in our manifesto. We were elected with a landslide majority at Westminster, and we are now implementing what was in our manifesto. So I think it's very important to be very clear on that for the public record. In terms of, I think your question, Councillor Shanks, about what other authorities say, I think I'm going to make one sort of party political point. One of the things I think that is positive about this process is it's an opportunity to put party politics aside and work in a place-based way to better our places. And I think you already see that going on in areas that have devolution, where you have politicians of different political parties sitting around that kind of top cabinet table that Councillor Hewitt describes, making decisions in the interests of their places. And I actually think, referring back to this age of sort of relative cynicism about politics, that could be a really positive thing for our residents and for our communities to see that this isn't about partisan politicking. This is actually about working together collaboratively and finding areas of common cause. That said, in terms of the Green Party position, there's been definitely a lot of kind of critique, as I understand it, from the Green Party in the region about how this isn't really devolution and this is taking powers upwards. That said, my understanding of the position to date from Lewes District Council and the Green Party there is that they're keen to unitarise on a county footprint. Now, I don't think both of those things can hold true. If you're really interested in greater localism, that would certainly direct you towards a larger number of unitaries for the reasons that we've set out, that you can stay closer to your communities, you can deliver services closer to the front line. So I think it would be worth maybe the Green Party reflecting a little bit on what its position is on local government reorganisation and on devolution and what makes sense. I think there was another question in there, was there? Councillor, just the numbers of councillors. So, you know, to your question about what does Mid Sussex think, so we're here to talk about the sort of Brighton and Hove plan, the interim plan and the potential final plan. All of those other authorities have their mechanisms and vehicles for putting in their interim plans and their final plans. So we in Brighton and Hove have put forward our interim plan. Lewes District, Mid Sussex, East Sussex County Council, West Sussex County Council have put in their interim plans and are also now working on final plans. It's my very strong view that as much as possible we should be collaborating across council boundaries at this point to try and develop proposals that have as much alignment as possible. If we can reach a consensus view as a whole area, I think that's all to the better. And actually government has been very clear in trying to encourage that and to say, look, you know, please try and work together at least on the data sharing, but ideally to develop proposals that you can all agree on. I think that will take some compromise on all sides to try and reach some consensus around local government reorganisation for Brighton and Hove and Sussex. So, you know, that's very much been my message to partners in the region, trying to convene meetings cross-council to try and develop proposals in this area. And, you know, definitely now as part of the next phase, our consultants and our chief executives are going to be meeting with colleagues in neighbouring councils to try and find greater consensus. But all of those interim plans are public. Government has also responded to the plans from other areas. So all of that information is in the public domain.
And, you know, it sort of takes away, I've heard it described, it's quite a good analogy, taking away the sort of parent-child model of it, of government telling local authorities what to do. It's now saying, you know, work together, share data, share evidence, work collaboratively and come up with a proposal to present to us.
Thank you. Next one on my list is Liz Lupton. Councillor Lupton.
Thanks very much, Chair. I just want to follow up a few comments from various councillors around the table and from Councillor O'Quinn. First of all, what I'd like to say about consultation is that it seems to have been very technocratic so far and obviously not engaged the majority of the population of Brighton and Hove. So we need to, I think, re-examine our consultation methods and how we're going to reach out to people so that it's actually more meaningful. And, you know, one way I think that we should address that is actually go into the areas that devolution will address, you know, all those headliners of transport, skills provision, expansion of housing, reinforcing economic development across the county, and how we're going to address the various measures for climate change and enhancement of the environment. And I think that would perhaps make it more meaningful. We've got to find another way to reach out to the public and get them fully on board. And alongside that, of course, we need a whole tier of sort of project management to address the other partnerships that we have across Sussex with our local community organisations and our very hard-working businesses. And, I haven't yet seen the machinery in place for that to be enabled and empowered. So I think we need to quickly come up with some models that can be approved by councillors so that we as councillors can work with them as well. Just to go on to planning. So housing is a really major concern for the public, and particularly in Sussex. Time has shown that leaving the private developer sector to provide much needed market and affordable housing with their proposals in the market has not led to the housing supply and physical and social infrastructure we need. So we need the power and skills of local authorities to intervene in the market to enable better and more holistic delivery to create what this government wants to see. Therefore, collaboration between the councils and through a spatial development strategy will, I think, be able to readily enhance this work. It's particularly good, I've seen it work in London, it's particularly good at aligning infrastructure development with housing.
Yeah.
Now, we've already seen in the past 3 days in Sussex a litigious dispute which has arisen between the Planning Inspectorate and Mid-Sussex District Council around the validity of the proposed council's new development plan, as the Inspectorate states Mid-Sussex has not met its duty to cooperate test with its surrounding local authority neighbours on the planning of housing numbers, and particularly in Crawley. And I don't know who is right or wrong here procedurally, but I think the story is indicative of tensions in Sussex regarding the approach to the planning of more intense development for housing, which we need. And it points to the acceptance of new development and consensus building within communities of a better partner approach between communities across the sector, and how the public sector should be working more proactively with the private sector developers to come up with proposals that can be seen as inclusive, democratically led, and with robust decision making that incorporates really good quality housing developments with placemaking and infrastructure, and addresses some of the public's fears about the reservations that have been expressed about having much larger housing developments. So what we need to have and avoid is the public going into kind of NIMBY mode about this and getting a backlash, which could be bad for the speed of delivery of housing, and ensuring that the planning system maintains a good level of local accountability with developers and officers. What the public don't want are proposals for characterless housing estates, where there is an absence of placemaking and an integrated approach to health and well-being and access to services. So there's a fear that has been voiced by MPs and Select Committee that democratic engagement in this planning system will be weakened as a result of the changes coming forward in the Planning and Infrastructure Bill. And so we need to keep a handle on how we review that accountability and how we ensure that it's continued in our future planning regimes. I think that's all I have to say, but so those are comments and prompts for ideas about how we can go forward and what perhaps we should be focusing on, and where the public might want to see some lead on themes that are coming out of the devolution headlines. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor, for those insightful questions and points and that analysis. On the consultation point, I think I would say, there's a sort of perennial question, isn't there, for councils, how we do consultation, how we can improve how we do consultation. And I think as a learning organisation, we're always really open to feedback and to try and improve how we engage our residents. That said, I think that we actually have a pretty good track record on consultation as it goes, with relatively high numbers of residents engaging in our consultations. And indeed, for this project so far, we have managed to run a public engagement exercise, albeit for a short time period, but that's something that other authorities did not manage to do at all. So I think we are on the front foot, but we absolutely recognise that in the period we've got now between the final proposal going in September, that we do need to consult. And I'll be really open to members' ideas and input on how we can do that better and do it in a more meaningful way. I am very available to do as much engagement as possible on this subject because I think it's so important. It's something that's a personal priority for me, both local government reorganisation and devolution. And I've been trying to do as much publicity and engagement as possible, whether that's through podcasts or interviews or community meetings. And Councillor Hewitt has indeed been doing the sort of speaker circuit around the city on this subject. So that's a kind of, anyone wants us to come and speak about this, please do invite us, and we'll, be glad to give more time. So that's what I'd say in consultation. On the housing, I think you're absolutely right to highlight that there needs to be much more intervention to unlock affordable housing for residents of our city. We have a high housing waiting list. We have far too many families in temporary accommodation, and the situation is pretty dire. Successive past governments have not acted in the way that they needed to on housing. So we now have quite an overwhelming housing crisis nationally and locally. For that reason, and for the home visits that I do, where I go and see 7-person families living in 2-bed flats, I'm very clear that we do need to reform how we deliver housing. Part of that rests in the planning system. I think it's right that we have democratic involvement in that, but we can't have a situation where houses that are much needed are not being built. So I think the reforms that the government's bringing forward on planning are welcome, but I also think that devolution has the potential to hugely unlock affordable housing for our city. The new relationship that would exist between Homes England and the Strategic Authority, whereby the Strategic Authority is driving the delivery of affordable housing, working in conjunction with the unitary authorities that sit around the table, I think could be truly transformative. So I think it's, of all the wins, I think affordable housing is going to be right up there.
Thank you, Councillor Sankey. I'm going to propose, as proof of how important Bella thinks this is, I'm informed that she doesn't need to leave now. She's rearranged her plans, so we have her for the duration of the meeting. So I'm going to propose that we take a 5 or 10 minute comfort break now, and then continue after that. Thank you. Should we say 5 or 10? 10 minutes. 10-minute comfort break. Person on my list with questions is Terry, Councillor Pickett. Sorry, caught you unawares.
Sorry. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. So thank you for clarifying a bit about the first phase of planning and how it's going to be paid for. My question is, though, has the council got a clear plan of how they're going to continue to pay for the next part? I mean, you know, are we selling assets or are we raising council tax? Is there a clear plan? Can I go through my questions one at a time? Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. So there's absolutely no suggestion of raising council tax. I think the feeling is that as an existing unitary authority that is not looking to put itself on a much larger geographical footprint, we are aiming for a proposal that would see us grow in size a little bit as a unitary authority, but that would be ultimately delivering economies of scale through that process. So I'm not envisaging that there is going to be huge costs to this council from this process of local government reorganisation. Yeah. And obviously, local government reorganisation is unlocking devolution for our area. And as I've already been very clear on, devolution stands to bring in huge amounts of income to our city and to our region. So I think it's very important to be clear from a Brighton and Hove perspective. I see the net sort of outcome of this process as being increased investment in our residents, our communities, our businesses, not a kind of net loss, which I think is kind of the premise of your question around local government, just the local government reorganisation side of it. So I think it's important to be clear on that.
I was actually just asking about, you know, if there were going to be further costs after the amount that we got from central government. I wasn't implying that in the long run that we would be running at a loss. So my second question is,
I'll just add in relation to funding, just wanted to be clear that there are two separate streams that we're talking about in relation to the two separate programmes. So there's the devolution programme, which comes with its own pot of establishment funding, if we call it that. And then there's the LGR programme, which again has its own separate pot of funding to support the transition. In relation to devolution, because you were asking about what will be the funding later, the later stages of funding for devolution, the funding that we have will take us to the establishment of the mayoral strategic authority in May 2026. And after that, the mayoral strategic authority itself will have its budget, its settlement, and will be required to budget and deliver its services in accordance with its own funding. So there's no ongoing cost to Brighton and Hove City Council or its residents.
Thank you, that's clear. My next question is related to the local growth plans, which is on page 8. Will the local growth plans start before devolution is finalised, and who will be responsible? What authority?
Thanks, Councillor, for the question. So I think the white paper is clear that strategic mayoral authorities will be required to produce a local growth plan, which I think is very welcome. Again, coming back to this point that there isn't currently at a regional level a kind of unified plan for economic growth. So the existing architecture on growth in our region is that we have a new economic board. We have our own growth plan for the city, thanks in no small part to Councillor Goddard. We have the Greater Brighton Economic Board, which I chair, which actually has recently commissioned a paper on economic growth opportunities and sustainable growth opportunities for the region in advance of devolution happening. And we're hoping that that will help develop some thinking that can then be taken up into the strategic mayoral authority. And then East Sussex and West Sussex each have their own economic growth boards. So there's, again, a huge amount of overlap, not necessarily very much collaboration or very much thinking about growth on a Sussex footprint. So that's what the new mayoral strategic authority will give us. And then my expectation would be that as one of the constituent unitary authorities, we would be sitting on the strategic authority, helping to devise that growth plan for the region, feeding in what Brighton and Hove can offer to that, obviously being a huge economic lung for the region, having some of the highest number of businesses per head of the population outside of London, I believe, having actually very strong growth and productivity from 2010 onwards relative to other parts of the country, but obviously acknowledging that we're subject to some of the pretty disastrous economic decisions taken by previous governments, and seeking to sort of recover some of that for our growth. So we'd be on the strategic authority, feeding into that growth plan for the region. Brighton and Hove has an outsized role to play in that, but I think there are so many opportunities kind of beyond our borders that we're not currently taking advantage of in the way that we could. We're obviously a coastal county. We have ports that I think could be more strategically aligned. We've got the second biggest international airport. There's a lot on sustainable growth that I think could be delivered through that mechanism. But yes, that will sit up there. We already have a refreshed economic plan, but obviously that will need to speak to whatever strategic growth plan is developed.
Thank you. On page 10, it says the environment and climate change are listed under areas of competence. And I note that this report states that any implications will inform the final decision. But will we be able to see an interim document on this before then as part of the interactive consultation process?
So I think one point of clarification, which actually Liz mentioned would be a good idea to make following the first part of today's session, is that the consultation on devolution has taken place. That was a government-led consultation on devolution for Brighton and Sussex, and that closed in April, I believe. Yeah, thank you. Government is now analysing the responses to that consultation and will be telling us if the statutory tests have been met. We expect to receive notification from government on that at some point this month. And should government decide that the statutory tests have been met and we're in the devolution priority programme, devolution will then begin the process of devolution and establishing the mayoral combined authority. There will not be further consultation on whether or not we should devolve. The further consultation that is going to be taking place is on local government reorganisation. So they are separate but obviously linked, because local government reorganisation unlocks devolution for us. But the further consultation that we're proposing is on local government reorganisation in advance of needing to submit a final plan on that to government at the end of September the 25th, I think. So that is what there'll be further consultation on, local government reorganisation, not further consultation on devolution. As devolution gets underway, there will be opportunities for engaging, for example, to Mark's point, with the community and voluntary sector. There will be a whole new body being established that will need to have the necessary checks and balances in terms of scrutiny, involvement of so many different partners. So it will be local authorities, but we'll also be looking to, we're obviously aligning with police and fire, potentially aligning with the NHS footprint. That's going to be a body that will have a lot of kind of partner input, and that's one of the whole purposes of this, that we align public sector boundaries and make it easier for us to deliver better outcomes, whether it's on health inequalities or whatever. But yeah, just very important to be clear that there isn't going to be further formal consultation on whether or not Brighton and Hove should become a devolved place. To your specific point on environment and climate, I think that the strategic authority has a really important role to play in that, and I think we're looking to try and ensure that there will be a place for climate leadership on the strategic authority. In my capacity as chair of the Greater Brighton Economic Board last summer, we launched an initiative called Sussex Energy, which is all about taking Sussex to a place of energy independence and sustainability by 2040. That's in conjunction with the 7 local authorities that make up the Greater Brighton Economic Board, along with the universities and other partners. And I hope that work will be ultimately sort of transferred into the mayoral strategic authority, getting that collaboration underway, ensuring that there are proper vehicles for investment in sustainable energy across the county, I think is going to be really crucial. So I think, to your specific point on climate, there is a big role for the strategic authority to play. I think it should have clear powers and duties around climate change, and be able to kind of work with both central government and local authorities in leading in that space.
But there won't be a specific report on that. Is that what you're saying?
So the devolution bill, when it's published by government, I think over summertime, will be clear about what powers and duties and responsibilities strategic authorities have in the round, including on, I would imagine, climate and environment. So that's, devolution is a process of government devolving these powers down. As I touched on a bit earlier, once the mayoral strategic authority is up and running, I think there will be this right to request additional power. So that's definitely something that it may be community groups, others have ideas for things that the strategic authority could take responsibility for or drive or pilot. So we'll be able to request additional powers. But there will be an initial set of powers and responsibilities, as we've touched on already, that are quite standardised rather than on this deal by deal basis that the strategic authority will have, which I think will also include powers and responsibilities on climate and environment.
Thank you. And then I've got a question from Ellen because she had to go, so I hope I can read that one out. Is that okay?
Yeah,
Thanks. Bear with me, I'm reading this up. So we're hearing today that there are plans to engage with neighbouring councils, that it's part of the action plan going forward. However, it might be happening a bit late for one council. What Councillor Shanks was getting at was that we are hearing that district councils like Lewis have not been engaged with adequately up to this point, that the Labour Deputy Leader of Lewis has not yet been engaged with about your proposals. The government guidelines suggest effective collaboration between all councils will be crucial and agree ways on working together. Lewis District Council are not happy about this. How are you going to work to bring them on board? Or is the thinking that if upper tier authorities are on board, then others will be overruled and we will have to fall in line regardless?
Thanks very much for your question. So I am proud that Brighton and Hove City Council has taken a lead on trying to forge dialogue and collaboration across the region. I have repeatedly written to leaders of local authorities, both districts, borough, and obviously the counties that I'm working closely with on Devo, to suggest meetings, to suggest joint initiatives to try and get this process done in the most inclusive way possible. And indeed, have written to Lewis on several occasions to request this. I think there is a challenge that we face in the region by virtue of the fact that in some places there have been devolution discussions happening for some time before government signalled that it's keen to work with that region to devolve. In our region, we've gone at quite, as people have described it, breakneck speed, from putting in expression of interest to us being successful and being selected by government for devolution. So I think there is quite a lot of work we need to do to build those relationships and to get that kind of trust and collaboration going. As I say, it's something I've very much been driving, but I think we're not yet where we want to be with it. Government's response to the interim plans was really clear that they expect us to collaborate, to share data, and in fact, Brighton and Hove and East Sussex being viewed as a combined area that needs to ideally submit one proposal, one submission to government means that, you know, we really now need to begin those conversations and that collaboration in earnest. So that's definitely something that we're working on and working towards.
Thank you. Joe Martindale.
Hi, thank you, Chair. And thank you for the presentation, because I think this is part of the process of everybody understanding more about devolution. So just a quick comment, really, that what's an offer really around collaboration and partnership. It was building on the point that Mark made about engagement, but there's also stuff we as a sector can help with at all levels. So maintaining the connections to local communities, both of identity and of place, but also strategically we've begun to forge links across Sussex as part of the Sussex Leaders Alliance around health, and there is some sort of infrastructure there that could be brought to bear. So that was it, really. I think it's about supporting the process, both from engagement, but also from a practical point of view, particularly on things like skills development, where that focus on communities that are a bit left behind. We need to keep the channels open from the hyperlocal to up to Sussex, who will be making the decisions on those things, and we can help where we can. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, definitely want to agree with that. The resources and the expertise that the community voluntary sector does bring, will be invaluable as part of engaging and consulting on local government reorganisation. And to touch on to the work your sector undertakes with health. Also, I know from first hand how the West Area Health Forum is such a massive part of the community, and having that replicated across the city and the county, be fantastic going forward. So I really value and appreciate the support for helping with engagement.
Thank you. Councillor Meadows. Thank you, Chair. I've got a number of comments and questions. Would you like them all together or one at a time? Because the first one is really about today's meeting. I didn't realise we had so much money. Special meeting today, special full council meeting, and that could have been in, 3 weeks' time, this meeting, when there's already a place committee meeting going on. And the 10th of July, we've got a normal full council meeting, yet we're having a special. Residents won't understand how there's never any money for them, but there's money for us to have a meeting. Just looking at the funding bit, because it says on 6, page 10, that there is actually significant financial implications for Brighton Hove. And I would agree with that. Yeah, we've got the 302,000, I believe you said, Bella, that would pay for it. But is that across East and West Sussex, or is that our allocation of the funding? I just wasn't quite sure of that, because it's clear in black and white, either the officers have got it wrong and there's no financial implications, as you're saying, or there are financial implications. So I was a little uncertain about that one. Shall I carry on, or would you like to answer that first? I think Bella wants to answer that one.
Can you turn the mic off, Bella? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Meadows. You can go back and check the record, but I think I stated very clearly earlier on, I think you were in the room, that the 300,000 figure is for Brighton, Hove and East Sussex. So I've been very clear and transparent on that already.
Thank you. So there may be further costs that we need to budget for over the next year, is all I was concerned about, really. There are a couple of things I was unclear about, because you're discounting 3 local authorities in the area. You're proposing 5, but I know that West Sussex, for example, are looking for 3.
So because we are a smaller authority, the chances are that we will grow or need to grow in the future. I just wondered if those 3 areas had been strategically mapped out to have a look at what they would look like, and had you had any discussions on those to see, because there's nothing in this report. It's just this Brighton Hove proposal. But I'm aware that other areas do not want 5, they only want 3, and I'm suspecting the government will stick to their 500,000 or more. So I just wondered if any mapping had been done at all on the 3 areas before it had been discounted, is one of the questions. I do have a concern, because I've been listening for a very long time, all this high ambition that everyone has, but really all residents want are the bins collected. They're not interested in all this highfalutin, who's going to take charge here, who's going to take that charge there. They just want their bins collected. So while we're pontificating on what strategy we're using and everything else, oh yes, and there was something about duplication. I just wanted to come back on, because with the mayor's office, if we have 5 authorities, say there's about 12 at the moment, I don't know, I'm taking a guess, 12 at the moment, and you're saying the back office functions won't be duplicated, I would suggest that the mayor's office would be 12 times as big. So it would be duplicated in a way, because they'll want to deal with separate areas. I do have a concern, because at the moment I can't see any difference. You're saying there'd be no difference will be seen by residents. And this is, we do need to consider residents, as I believe someone said earlier. It will still be a 2-tier system for many people. It will just change from county council to strategic mayor authority. So it's still a 2-tier system. The difference for us is we become a 2-tier system, because we will have this level of mayoral authority over us, dictating what we will be building, dictating what work streams will be required. So we will become a 2-tier authority again, rather than just a unitary. And that concerns me. So I understand that when this was first mooted, Labour did think that they were going to win everything. But as we have seen lately, things are changing. There are new boys on the block, whether we like them or not. And you may not get it all your own way. You will get it all your own way here in committee. You've got the numbers, and in full council, you've got the numbers. You can push through what you wish. But, you know, there are still concerns. But all residents want are the simple things. Bins collected, rubbish cleared, no fly tipping, get rid of the graffiti. What difference will they see?
Thanks very much, Councillor Meadows, for that broad range of questions and points that you've made. I'll start with the first, where I think you're taking some umbrage with being here in this committee session going ahead at all. I suppose I'd simply point out that that's not a matter for the administration. Scrutiny is entirely separate and has called this session, and you're obviously a Scrutiny member. I also think it's entirely normal, and I understand that in Conservative controlled East Sussex and West Sussex, they've similarly had Scrutiny sessions on what is probably the biggest set of changes and sort of devolution to our area in a generation, maybe in several generations. And, you know, really fundamentally important questions that matter hugely to the lives of residents. So for my own part, I'm really glad to be here, and I'm glad that Scrutiny is performing this very important function. And I suppose it saddens me that you don't agree that this is important and significant by implication. in terms of the number of unitaries, I don't know whether you're privy to information that I'm not, but as I understand it, the position of West Sussex County Council is that they are exploring with their district and boroughs some different options for local government reorganisation in their patch, which include both the option of one unitary, but also two. So I don't think it is their stated position that they want 3 unitaries. But again, I'm not sure whether you're privy to information that I am not. I suppose I'd also just say on the sort of party point that, this is an endeavour that Brighton and Hove City Council is undertaking with 2 Conservative controlled county councils, and we have reached consensus between us that devolution is going to be a great thing for our residents. So again, I'm just a bit unsure what the Conservative position is. It's something that your government previously championed when in government, although didn't really deliver hugely at pace. But devolution has long been thought to deliver huge benefits, and we're seeing examples of that, as I've mentioned, in Greater Manchester, in Liverpool City region. Coventry is just set to benefit from a multi-million pound regeneration as a result of devolution. So I suppose if I'm really honest, I'm becoming slightly tired of this idea that devolution doesn't deliver benefits, because it's evidenced, it's clear that there are benefits, whether it's the B network, regen, skills, and greater investment in skills because of what's done with the unused apprenticeship levy. There are very, very clear benefits. It's raw money being invested in communities. So to your points about graffiti and bins and all of that, I would expect there to be a lot of things that can improve in terms of the delivery of services by increased growth and more fiscal devolution to mayors and to local authorities. So I think the benefits point is really clear and has been addressed quite a few times. I don't know whether there was anything else on Councillor Hewitt, thanks.
Thanks. So, in regarding to what you said, Councillor Meadows, regarding the creation of 2-tier area, I think it might have slight confusion in terms of that. So currently the 2-tier system which operates in the east and west are for providing the council services, some with counties, some with districts and boroughs, and the proposal is for them to be operated as unitary authorities, such as what we have here in Brighton and Hove. Having the strategic mayoral authority, which has those 7 devolved strategic functions, they're currently managed and run from central government, so it's not going to be the creation of an additional tier above. It's the devolution, the devolution of transfer of those responsibilities, powers and funding from what's currently in central government to a new strategic authority. So it wouldn't be duplication in the sense of where you have a county and borough or district model of governance.
Just to quickly come back on that, yes, I do appreciate East and West Sussex are 2-tier systems of governance, which we are a unitary, we don't have that. But what I'm saying is by relieving the unitaries in those areas, the 2-tier system, by removing one layer of county councils, you're replacing it with a strategic mayoral authority. And as it will be replaced over us as well, that makes us now a 2-tier system.
Just to really be clear on that's absolutely not the analysis, Councillor Meadows, in the sense that the devolved functions that will go to the mayoral strategic authority are being devolved from national government. So it's not creating a new layer above us as the unitary authority. There's already those powers already sit with national government, and instead of national government making decisions on them, they will be made closer to home by the mayoral strategic authority. But it's not that some of our functions are going to be split into the mayoral strategic authority and that we're going to be splitting our functions and becoming a 2-tier system. That's not the case.
Can I just clarify then? What you're saying is that the devolved systems will be coming down from government. That is another tier of local government in a sense. But does that mean our MPs will now be irrelevant because they were our link into government?
Thank you, Councillor Meadow. So no, it's not another tier of local government. We will remain the deliverer of local government services in Brighton and Hove as a unitary authority. What will exist that is new is regional government that will receive powers from central government. So it's not two tiers of local government at all. It is new powers for our region, which, as Liz has outlined, is powers being brought closer to home to give local people more influence and control over decisions that are being made in their region.
Thank you. Can I just add slightly to one of the points that Bella made, I think, in response to Councillor Meadows, which is that I get to hear some of this conversation from a fire perspective as well, and so therefore have some dealings with both East and West Sussex and the various political parties and their groups that exist there. And I think I can confirm that both East and West Sussex have papers similarly to us, papers going to their cabinets on exactly the same time frame as the paper going to our cabinet, and just an update like this. And in both cases, they have place committee scrutiny meetings that are in those Conservative controlled councils, special meetings to discuss this very topic. So just to add that.
I think the word you said there was cabinet. It's perhaps others are not in the cabinet, have other ideas.
Nevertheless, they're having exactly the same series of meetings that we are, and they are not controlled by.
Just as important, again, I think it's very important that the public record is really clear. We have the same system of governance in Brighton and Hove now as they do in East and West Sussex, cabinet systems of governance. So Conservative controlled county councils with cabinet systems, so exactly the same system of governance. We're no different. There are papers going to cabinet that are being looked at by scrutiny committees in an entirely normal and democratic way under our local government arrangements in this country. And as I say, just because I think there is always this concern for me these days that there can be a sort of lazy analysis of governance. And I've heard it in this chamber too many times, actually. So I think it's very important to be clear to our residents that we have a very democratic system of local government in this country and in this city. And we follow all of the procedures to make sure that we're being transparent, that we're being held to account, that we're being open with our residents, and that we're developing policy in a way that is completely fitting with those constitutional governance arrangements.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to go back to my long list of names, which the next one is Sarah Fulford, who put her hand up so long ago that she's disappeared from my screen. So I'm hoping she's still there. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, I feel a bit, I'm here representing the Older People's Council and feel a bit nervous really about asking anything because I still feel fairly sort of ignorant in comparison to I think the majority of people here about this whole thing, and I think I'm probably reasonably representative of the general public because people, people's idea of devolution is something that happens in Wales and Scotland still. So, but what you're thinking about, how do you keep the voice of older people? Brighton and Hove's quite different from East and West Sussex. So how do you keep the voice of people and in our case of older people in Brighton and Hove when it feels like collaboration works really well in my experience in my career when there's plenty of money around? But when there isn't plenty of money around, there tends to be competition can come into it. And how do Brighton and Hove compete for those resources with other authorities? So I don't fully understand it. I feel as though we could do with some sort of explanations or consultations sessions with all of this that gives us examples about how something might work, because I think it's terribly difficult for us to understand it. I know most of you there have been involved with this for quite a long time, and I'm really struggling to keep up, even though I've been to 2 meetings about it, and I still feel like I don't really understand. But but one of our experiences when authorities sort of come into one, supposedly collaboratively, you'll probably remember over those dementia beds. So when East and West Sussex and Brighton and Hove become one strategic health authority, beds got taken away from Brighton and Hove and put to East and West Sussex. So the voice didn't feel heard. And how do we keep some sort of voice if we're sort of outnumbered and outdone? I don't really get it, but think it would be really helpful to have I think people, we didn't really know that consultation was happening, and it feels like something's happening that's massive without people really, the public, understanding it. And that consultation, the only time I was even aware of it was after it had finished. So having some sort of way of presenting this in a way that people can generally understand and not feel too nervous about asking questions about would be good. But how do we really keep our voice as voluntary organisations when, you know, we're just one small part of things?
Thanks, Sarah, very much for your honesty and for the sort of challenge in that question. I think it's really useful for me to hear. I suppose I'd start by saying that, as I've indicated, I recognise that this is change that is being brought about relatively quickly from a bit of a standing start. I know there have been previous attempts in East and West Sussex on Devo, but never anything that's got really close to happening. So there is a lot of change to consider and to process. I think, by way of reassurance, there is nothing being suggested in devolution that would be anything to do with services being taken away. So we are a unitary authority in Brighton and Hove. We deliver over 700 services to our residents. There is no suggestion that we will deliver fewer services or that any of those services will be delivered. There's any sort of merger between us and another council in terms of, you know, taking away services. That's not what's being proposed. There's not a kind of loss of services. Those services will continue to be delivered by a unitary authority for this city. It may be on a slightly larger footprint. Devolution is about the possibility of more money and powers coming to a regional body that will then be able to cascade some of that down to us. So it might be direct funding in a regeneration project in the city. To take the example of Manchester and the B network, they managed to work at the regional level to better integrate their transport, to take buses back under public control, to bring benefits to their residents that mean it's easier for them to get around, you know, something that I'm sure has hugely benefited older people in particular and enables people to retain more independence. And they've seen the very positive results of that in terms of the number of journeys, what that's done to the price of transport, the cost of it, being able to make those vital economies of scale. So that's really what devolution is proposing, not the taking away or merging of services, but actually the possibility of providing higher quality services and tackling some of the really wicked issues that we face as a society. Like health inequalities in this city are in a really shameful place, as they are across the region, as they are across the country. It shouldn't be that, you know, the circumstances in your postcode determines your life expectancy. Those are the things that a devolved authority can grapple with and try and ensure that resources being put in the right place, that it's being done in a preventative way rather than a sort of emergency services way where possible. Those are the things that are on the table. But it does sound from your question and your thinking that, yeah, there is a case for this being explained much more and in as accessible way as possible to all of our communities, so that people can really understand this process. And as I say, I think we've got the advantage of the benefit of the fact that we're not the guinea pigs. You know, devolution, you mentioned the devolved nations, and we've also got, you know, much of the north of England, and then the stories and the outcomes that have shifted. So we can look to that and provide those examples and those cases of why this is a good thing to do and the kind of benefits that it can bring.
I think that is really important if you want to genuinely consult. It's got to be made into a way people can understand both the benefits and the potential drawbacks. You know, I think, you know, that's what's absent for me. It's sort of too not grabbable at an understandable level at the moment. But yes, so consultations that allowed that would be helpful, and those examples are really helpful.
And in terms of the specific question you raised at the start, Sarah, was, yeah, older people's councils and other like organisations which currently exist will still have links, but they have with their local authority. So devolution or indeed local government reorganisation won't be losing those valuable links.
Thanks. So next one on my list is Anusri.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to firstly say I think ambition is good. I think high aspirations are important. And as a Brighton and Hove resident, I want more than the collection of my bins for my council, and I very much welcome this discussion. Right. Thank you, Councillor Hewitt, for your helpful presentation, and I welcome Councillor Sankey, your acknowledgement of the voluntary sector, who's already working in a devolved adjacent way and can perhaps provide some of the footprint for co-designing and delivery partners. And thinking about that, I mean, I wondered if you had a formal structure or mechanism within which that could take place. And I know you've got a very short time span, so the deadline is 26th of September. If something could be put in place where you can have that in a very organised, structured manner, I think would be really, really helpful. So we can help support in that governance, planning and strategic discussions, because we've, as a sector, have been trying to have those discussions within health, and it's not easy. And we could perhaps support in that as a sector, I think. And to Sarah, your point, I think, you know, we can look to build that representation. I would like to see that because there's some interesting stuff happening in Manchester. I think Mayor Burnham set up the Disabled People's Panel, and I think that could be a good model for us to follow in Brighton. But whatever structure, I'm quite agnostic actually about this, but whatever system we have, it needs to be inclusive and take people with you. I think that would be really, really important. Because if you want to do devolution, take us with you in a meaningful way. Help us build, because actually it's interesting when you do engagement. I was telling a new colleague, you know, engagement is great because people have the answers to your questions. You don't have to work that hard. I mean, it's hard, but, you know, it's great. And I think thinking about how structures might be put in place, because you can't have all those discussions straight away about how you include fire, police and health as well in these discussions. And it might look differently later, but in the initial structure, maybe involve them. But I think the voluntary sector is very, very open and ready. And please do involve us in this meaningful way. We're really keen to support this space.
Thanks very much, Anusri, for that question. I suppose that just at the outset, again, slightly unravel local government reorganisation and devolution. So the September deadline is for our final proposal on local government reorganisation. We are planning to produce a consultation on that we'll definitely want CVS input into. But the way that will work is that it will be a published consultation that we then invite input. I'd be really happy to meet with the CVS sector once that is out and to discuss it and make sure we're really meaningfully getting your feedback and your insight. That's very much a kind of local government-led process because to get to the stage of consultation, we've got to do the data sharing with other local authorities, develop proposals that would meet the government's range of criteria around financial sustainability. So it's a slightly technical thing, but obviously still receiving community feedback is going to be really important. I sense your question as more towards the devolution project and ensuring that there is a CVS voice in that and that we're thinking sort of creatively about how we use the insights and the expertise of the CVS sector to get the most from the devolution powers and investment that we're hoping to get. And I think I completely agree, and I think that's an excellent recommendation. We're currently working with our neighbouring authorities to decide how best we set up potentially some sort of vehicle, whether formal or informal, to help us shape and establish the new mayoral strategic authority in May. And I think we definitely would want to have CVS involvement in that structure, whatever ultimate form it finally takes. So we can definitely take that away and maybe come back to you with some ideas for how that could work so that we're getting that input really early on.
Sorry, I just wanted to add thank you. That's really helpful. And I think it is really overwhelming, the level of information coming through. And if there was a way just to make it really easy for all of us to understand what comes next in really sort of plain English, would be really welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Parrott and then Councillor Azza-Zimmerman.
Actually, I just wanted to make a comment coming back on some of the comments that have been made here in the chamber today. I find it very dismissive and very demeaning, having just spent the last 2.5 months engaging with residents, both as a campaign and then as a new councillor, and having done many hours now the last month going out to meet people. I find it really distressing that as councillors we could sit here and say that all our residents are interested in is bin collection. That is not my experience on the door, and I'm sure that anybody who campaigned and knocked on the door, and that includes all of us, all of our parties were involved in that, found that actually our residents are highly engaged and do want to be involved in more than bin collection. It's extremely important, obviously, as are potholes and weeds. But however, actually our residents are really engaged in education, in transport, in equality. And actually these were the bigger issues that we encountered significantly as we campaigned around my ward, which is Westbourne and Poets Corner. And I think that it's demeaning actually to say that all residents are interested in that. I absolutely agree with engaging in the voluntary sector. CVS, I think that's absolutely important, and I've spent quite a lot of time, and I'm willing to pick up with anybody with my lead role for disability. So really interested in talking to everybody. And I think one of the ways that we do develop a voice is by developing better and closer links with those communities, with the voluntary sector in the first place, so that all of these issues can then be discussed and fed backwards and upwards as well. So that's really just a comment more than a question.
Thank you, Councillor Parrott. I absolutely agree with you. Councillor Azza-Zimmerman.
Thank you, Chair. During my as a mayor of Brighton and Hove, I witnessed firsthand how local communities thrive when they have the power to shape their own future. That is the promised devolution. It is not simply about shifting authority. It is about restoring trust in local voice and investing in people where they live and work. True devolution must include economic fairness, community-led planning, and equal access to opportunity My role now as I ensure that Brighton diverse community, it is a small business, cultural group, neighborhood like Hamilton Cornell. Joe Martindale is here after a long time. Nice to see you here in this room. Devolution must not be a policy, it must be a pathway to include inclusion, dignity, and local resilience. My new role as a small business ambassador for Brighton and Hove, I obtain to see passion and resilience of local entrepreneurs. But I must ask, are we, as a city, unintentionally devaluing our small businesses by sidelining them in policy decision, limiting their access to funding, or favoring large corporations? What more can be done to ensure small businesses are not only supported but truly valued as the backbone of our city's economy? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Aziduzaman. I'd like to say at the outset, I completely agree with the way that you have expressed the potential of devolution. And I think you're right to say that it mustn't be a policy that is being done to people, but something that is genuinely empowering. And I think that is a challenge. You know, I think today's session has sort of illuminated how much more work we have to do to explain and make real to people what the potential of devolution is. I think that is a challenge for us, and we need to really lean into that challenge. I think that your point around small businesses is a really important one. I know from our economic growth plan that, you know, it's very clear the importance of small business in this city. And I don't think we have always historically as a council got it right in terms of, as you put it, including small businesses in our thinking and ensuring that they are given the opportunities and empowered to grow and scale up where that is what they need to do, or, you know, just be able to invest and sustain themselves. Part of the reason I'm very pleased that you are now a small business ambassador is because I think we need to develop our thinking in terms of how we engage with our small businesses in the city. And I'm hopeful that that's work you'll be able to lead on. Because I think we do have a way to go, particularly ensuring that we are engaging with and listening to and supporting our Black and minority ethnic businesses in the city, which again play an absolutely huge role in so many of our sectors. So I think, yeah, there is a lot of work to be done. And, you know, obviously part of that is something that devolution will have a bearing on, whether it comes to how we use business rates that are collected or whatever that might be. But there are also other opportunities through, I know there's a review of licensing policy going on. There is a lot of activity that I think should really ensure that we are allowing our small businesses in the city to flourish.
And yeah, just to follow up, so you wouldn't get lost at all with devolution, the work which you'll be doing as our small businesses ambassador and your counterparts in other local authorities will still continue even after local government reorganisation, when the those new councils will, you know, be formed on their more local community-based footprints. So no, it's still, as Bella, as Councillor Shanky says, still, you know, will play a valuable part and will feed into both the local authorities' strategic work, but as well as the strategic work of the new mayoral authority.
Thank you. I'm sure we're all getting to the point where we're quite keen to wrap this up, but I've got two more people who've indicated that they wish to ask questions, but as they've asked questions already, I'm going to nip in myself first, because I've got a couple of, there's been some really high level questions and lots of really inspiring questions and answers, and I'm just going to drag the tone down a bit, because the ones that I've got that haven't been answered already in the course of other people's questions are kind of, I don't know whether it's just me, but I'm still quite confused about some of the practicalities. And it's quite basic stuff, but I'm not sure I'm really understanding. Like it is stuff like, I'm not sure I get what the difference is between the shadow unitary authorities that we're apparently going to have by April 2027 and then the new unitary authorities that we're going to have by April 2028. I'm not sure I even get what that means. You know, we're all right. We're a unitary authority that isn't scheduled to have another election until 2027 in any case. But I'm not sure what that means in terms of the rest of the Sussex region. And I'm also not sure, we all know that there's going to be a mayoral election at speed next May, and that after that we will have a mayor and therefore a mayoral authority. But I'm not sure who's going to initially, at least, because local government reorganisation comes afterwards. I'm not sure I understand who sits on that mayoral authority initially. Like, is it representatives from East and West as well as Brighton and Hove? In which case, how legitimate are they if they are not having elections themselves, or are they having elections? We know their elections were meant to happen this year. Are they happening next year for the existing authorities? So if anyone can clear up my brain fog about those practical things, I'd be very grateful.
Thanks very much for the questions, Chair. Really important questions to air, I think. So my understanding, so the postponement of elections in the counties that took place early this year were postponements for 1 year. And there have not been any final decisions by government as to exactly what the position is for the elections that are due to take place next year. I believe there are a number of districts and boroughs that are, I think, meant to be out in thirds across the region. And so I'm not aware of any decision making on that. I think Councillor Hewitt was going to come in on the question you had about shadow unitaries and then unitaries for 27-28.
Thanks. So I'll just begin actually with the question you asked about what would the makeup be of the mayoral combined county authority when that's formed. So the makeup of that would be the directly elected mayor and 2 reps from the current top tier councils which operate as East Sussex, West Sussex county councils and Brighton and Hove. So that would be the sort of interim holding a position of that authority until it becomes a mayoral strategic authority, and then, as we said earlier, that would then be made up of the directly elected mayor and the reps from the new unitaries in that footprint. In terms of the shadow ones, it would be pretty similar, where it would be exactly the same sort of thing set up with what we had when Brighton and Hove City Council was established. There was a year of 96 where there was a sort of shadow authority, just whilst it's almost going through the phase of, I'm sure there's probably a better way of describing it, but as a the phrase of it sort of actually being constituted and set up as that body. It's almost, shadow seems quite a strange sort of phrase to use, I guess, because that almost seems like it's an outside body looking in. I guess interim, would that be a better way of describing it potentially? Maybe. Do you want to come and clarify it? Or is that okay?
Well,
yes,
I was just going to add in relation to you asked about the legitimacy of the mayoral strategic authority in that interim period, which, because you're absolutely right around the timescale that those 2 programmes are happening at different speeds, and we will have the mayor elected in May, and we won't have local government reorganisation completed until later. But the mayoral strategic authority, in addition to the members that Councillor Hewitt has set out, we're very clear that those will be the 6 voting members plus the mayor from the upper tier authorities. But it's also possible for the mayoral strategic authority to agree to have non-constituent members, so other members. Currently, the English devolution white paper suggests there will be up to 6 non-constituent members. So there is the opportunity for wider involvement in that period, as well as going forward. So I imagine that that's how they will address that issue of legitimacy that you've raised.
Yeah, I mean, we don't live in East or West Sussex, but it just seems to me that they'll have been, by the time the mayor is elected, those councillors East and West Sussex County Councils will have been there for 5 years, so they're already a full year outside of their initial elected period, and then they'll be sitting on the mayoral strategic authority, at least in the interim. And if I was a resident in East or West Sussex, I feel like I might have something to say about that, but you know, that's kind of outside of our remit, I guess. But I just, thank you for clearing that up. It's a bit clearer to me now. Anyway, so I'm going to go back to the order of hands, and the last two I had were Councillor Pickett and then Mark again.
Thank you. It's just, I don't think Councillor Shank's question about how many councillors will, sorry, I'll start again. Councillor Shank's question about numbers of councillors, will we have the same number of councillors as we have now, or will that change?
Thanks. So that would be a decision from the Boundary Commission, and as we all sort of know, in Brighton and Hove, the Boundary Commission did their review and implemented their recommendations ahead of the May 2023 elections we had here. Of course, you know, that was all based on sort of resident per councillor ratio and recognising, you know, the place and communities which exists. So I think it's probably quite fair to say that that's probably the most up-to-date modelling in terms of that, as you know, the first commission they've done in the city in about 20 years for that. So I guess it would be subject for any review from the Boundary Commission, but I think it's, you know, quite reasonable to say we've had a review recently, and that formula and modelling would still be quite accurate. I hope that answers the question. Thanks, Anne.
If you're going to have, if you're taking in bits of Peacehaven or Shoreham or whatever, if you look at the numbers of councillors that are already in Ada or already in Worthing, there's bound to be a loss of councillors across a new unitary, because I mean, unless you become much bigger as a unitary. So I mean, yes, I understand the Boundary Commission, I went through all that, but there will have to be a re-look at who, and it might mean that we have less representation. I mean, there will be less representation anyway, because districts are going, but you know, I suppose it's just, where does that come after? That presumably comes after the government said have this, then they get the Boundary Commission in.
Yes, that's correct. That would come after Councillor Shanks. But I think it's important to note in terms of, I suppose, where you face a sort of decreased councillor representation, you know, you've currently got a situation, and I've spoken to Green councillors and Labour councillors about this across East and West Sussex, whereby under the two-tier system, you have the same person sometimes elected to either the borough council and the county council, or the district council and the county council. And I think one of the things that residents find particularly frustrating, and I know some councillors find very frustrating, is you could, for the sake of argument, be a Hastings borough councillor and you receive an email from a resident to your Hastings borough council email address about a pothole, and you have to reply and say, I'm sorry, you need to actually email me on this different email address, East Sussex County Council, and I will try and sort this out for you, although it's the same person. I mean, the waste and the inefficiency and the duplication of the two-tier system, I think, is pretty indefensible in this modern age. And so, yes, you might have fewer councillors, but I would argue that by unitarising, you actually empower councillors to behave in the way that we're able to behave already in this unitary authority, of seeking to join things up, get things done, be outcome driven, rather than, you know, moving queries around various systems.
Thank you. And finally, Mark.
Thanks. I didn't plan to have the last word, but somebody was around in '97 and involved with that reorganisation. Then there was, you know, maybe I'm wrong and there are other people here who were involved, but it was, you know, it was seen as challenging at the time. I just wanted to throw a possible, not spanner in the works, but just there's one other council or one other local authority body that no one has mentioned at all in any of these discussions. That's the South Downs National Park Authority, which has planning powers, is a body that exists. How are they going to be? I mean, you talked about non-constituent members. I assume, I would hope that they would have a non-constituent member. They do, as I said, they do have planning powers. They do have a role in this. I'm just thinking about the other areas in the country. Have they had that have got combined authorities? Have they got national parks? I think Manchester just streaks into the Peak District. And I think one of the things that would be worth looking at, I'm sure you're doing this, is going and round the other places that have just been through this process. The ones that are more similar, like Cambridge and Peterborough, maybe, or those sort of areas, and talking to them. But the national park is a really important body. It does all these functions. Would they lose some of their powers to the mayor? Would they? I don't know. That's the question. And I mean, thank you for, I just got to say thank you from the voluntary sector for the ability to contribute to all this. And some of the answers you've all given, I think, are quite heartening and hopefully will be taken forward. So got to put that in at the end.
Thank you very much, Mark. Really excellent questions. I'm glad you had the final word. So on the South Wales National Park specifically, we have already, and when I say we, I mean myself, the leader of East Sussex, the leader of West Sussex, and our chief executives met with their chief exec and their chair to discuss devolution as part of our programme of meeting with various partners. So that will include the fire service, health, other key public sector partners, to discuss this process going forward. Many of these bodies also responded to the government consultation on devolution, so have had an opportunity to feed in their particular thoughts about the challenges and opportunities that this presents to them and their, set of objectives. Really productive, really positive meeting. I think they are very much embracing this as a national park that bridges lots of different authorities. I imagine, like many of our partners, they currently have to deal with quite a lot of frustration in terms of the fact that there isn't yet this regional entity that can enable better collaboration and strategic planning. So I think they really welcome this. Had a really productive and instructive conversation, and it's one of the things I feel very enthused about, that I think there's now going to be this opportunity for that regular dialogue, and recognising that they have an important planning role, and we really need to bring them into this process of thinking about everything from climate change to nature recovery to affordable housing and transport. They've got such a big role to play. And you had one more question that I thought was excellent, and I can't remember, and it's because it's the
meeting.
Oh yes. So we are very much doing that, and making sure that where we've got specific questions. So, for example, I'm really keen that we very early on get stuck into the health inequalities piece, and I know that there's been some excellent work in Greater Manchester on that and some real learning, so really engaging with them. Also on climate, so making sure that we're speaking, and this is happening at officer level, speaking to officers in combined authorities that have a lot of experience of the powers available, how you best use them, what the learning is, so we're not reinventing the wheel, and we're able to just kind of jump in with, the kind of projects and initiatives that we need to start nudging the dial a bit. So yeah, a really good point, and we're starting doing it, and I think we want to kind of scale up those meetings and that engagement.
Thank you. I mean, I'm not going to let you have the last word, sorry, because I'm going to have the last word. Not least to say that you're wrong that there's only one local authority that no one has mentioned, because there is another one, which is that we have two separate fire services in Sussex currently. One is run through West Sussex County Council, which will have to come out of West Sussex County Council with all the kind of complications that involves, and the other of which is run by a fire authority, so which several people in this room sit on. So it's not the only local authority we haven't discussed in this meeting, but it will remain undiscussed because I think we've reached the end of our patience and all the questions. So it just remains for me to say that members are being asked to note the update on devolution and local government reorganisation. Are you happy to note the report? Yes. Good. Yes, everyone for coming. Thank you for answering so many questions. And I will now close the meeting.